Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, an incredible opportunity to talk about what I'm working on with my team. George is also here. George, could you wave? All right. Nice. So I'm originally I am from Nigeria, actually. My parents, I was born to a dad who is a professor, and my mom is a journalist. And they gave me access to reasonably good education in Nigeria, and I'm here today. But the reality is that most Nigerians don't have the opportunities that I've had, so I am quite privileged. So what do most Nigerians do? This is what most Nigerians do. They are retailers, they are traders, they have corner stores, they sell stuff. So the question is, the world, has changed, or the world continues to change very quickly. And the question is, what would happen to these people as technology begins to change every aspect of what we do, including commerce and retail? A couple of years back, I worked in the oil and gas industry in Nigeria for one of the big oil majors. And one day I came across a very staggering statistic that said that company produced 7% of the country's GDP. But that company employed just 1,000 people. Now Nigeria has 175 to 180 million people. And then I asked myself, so what are other people producing? How, if the oil and gas industry is like the huge source of foreign exchange earnings, what hope do we have as a nation if we cannot build and diversify our economy as a nation and ultimately as a continent in Africa? And then I did a little bit more research, and I discovered that retail actually is pretty big, and retail employs a lot of people. So retail currently now in Nigeria takes up about 20% of GDP, and this is according to McKinsey. Now, what is also really interesting is that since the mobile technology revolution began in Nigeria, productivity has increased very dramatically. But the interesting thing is that the biggest source of the increase in productivity has come from increase in the productivity of people, not necessarily like innovative startups and stuff like that. So essentially what the mobile phone did was to make it easier for people to communicate. So a lot of people who run businesses, instead of engaging on 10 trips a day to conduct their business, now that got reduced to, say, 2 trips a day. So these are a few more facts about Nigeria. Remember I said something about retail and how big retail is in Nigeria and ultimately across the continent. There are about 9 million micro merchants in Nigeria. So these are micro merchants that focus on retail. But if you look at all types of businesses, there are about 18 million. Now retail employs about 30 million people in Nigeria. But this is something that I also found that was quite interesting to me. When you look at small businesses, so you have micro businesses, you have small businesses, and you have big businesses. For small to big businesses, or for micro businesses, I beg your pardon, it's almost equal between men and women. But when you look at small businesses, so small business means you've grown, expanded your business, you have a little bit more customers, you generate more revenue. That percentage drops for women to 13%. So essentially what this tells us is that women find it extremely difficult, especially women retailers, to grow their businesses from being a micro business to a small business. Now, why is that? I'll get to that a little later in my presentation. I talked about the ongoing mobile phone revolution. Today, there are over 1 billion mobile connections in Africa. And the consequence of that is that retail is also starting to move online very aggressively. So when you see what has happened in Europe, in the US, and in Asia right now, the rise of companies like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, and the rest of them, people are beginning to conduct transactions a lot more online than ever before in the history of the world. And the same trend is now starting in Africa as well. So you have this 2 incredibly smart brothers, the Sama brothers, who started what they call the Rocket Internet group of companies, and they're investing massively in e-commerce in developing countries. And I think they've done a great job, even though some people might disagree with me, but that's fine. So the bottom line is retail is moving online very quickly. And this is another trend that would continue to drive this growth and this shift from offline retail to online retail in Africa. Today, 75 million smartphones across the continent. Over the next couple of years, that figure increases dramatically to over 500 million. Now, in the last report that Merimika released, Merimika's annual report, KPCB report on internet trends, Nigeria had, as a percentage of, the percentage of internet traffic that is mobile, Nigeria had the highest figure in the world, of about 85%. So you have a very strong mobile culture in Nigeria, and the same applies to many other African countries. Essentially, it's probably the same trend for developing countries as well. And this is also a little more data on what's going on in the e-commerce industry in Nigeria. Today, it's about $500 million. Over the next 5 years, it will grow to almost $10 billion. So you can see that how technology is impacting retail and how retail is moving online aggressively. But so before I go ahead and talk about the problems, when you have the Amazon model, which is the inventory model, so Amazon also has a marketplace, but the inventory model, when people get more used to buying things online, what that means is that they don't buy things offline anymore, or they don't buy a lot of things offline anymore. Now the question is, what happens to these millions of small retailers who have shops, and this is all their means of livelihood, who cannot compete with Amazon or the Amazons of Africa? Maybe they go out of business. And what happens? That creates huge unprecedented unemployment. So for me and for my team, the question is, how do we enable these merchants, this army of merchants, to also play a role in the new digital economy? How do we enable them to sell stuff online and to also to be able to deliver products to their consumers within cities? Because there are two key challenges that face e-commerce in developing countries. The first is payments. So today in Nigeria, cash on delivery is about 80%. Now, most small retailers don't want to go through the risk of delivering a package, of leaving their shops to go deliver a package to someone on the other side of town, and then the person comes and says, oh, sorry, I don't have money to pay. Could you come back tomorrow? Now, they've incurred the cost of transportation, but now they have to go back. And a lot of these people also don't have a lot of people they employ, so they don't even want to leave their shops, right? So cash on delivery is a huge challenge. And payment systems also fail very frequently. So the point of sale systems that you have in Nigeria and most parts of Africa today still rely on GPRS technology, which is not the best to use. So you can see the huge challenge with payments for merchants, especially with electronic payments. Even though M-Pesa has been quite successful in East Africa, M-Pesa has not been successful in most other parts of Africa. Now, the other big challenge, which is what we face, which is what we are trying to address, because we have to pick one problem at a time, is fulfillment. Now, when we look at a city like Lagos, for example, we see all sorts of problems. Traffic congestion. The average Lagosian spends anywhere between 5 and 8 hours in traffic on a daily basis. You have the problem of bad roads, and then it's also very difficult to trace people's addresses. So essentially, for a retailer, for a small merchant who wants to deliver products to a consumer, they have to deal with all these problems. Now, for the existing e-commerce companies that have tried to, against all odds, launch e-commerce platforms in Africa, these are the challenges that they faced. And using Nigeria as a case study, failure rates for delivery is about 10%. And a bigger problem even is the people who actually do deliveries today. They make roughly about $3 a day, which comes to about $150 a month. Now, that is really small. I guess that is really small. A typical person like this has a family, has a wife, has kids, has to send them to school, has to pay for housing in an extremely expensive city like Lagos. It just doesn't work. So we've looked at all these problems as a team at Max, and we said, okay, we can use technology and a different business model to solve the fulfillment problem for merchants in urban cities in Africa, starting with Lagos. So we launched in August. And our approach is very simple. We crowdsource dispatch riders So people who ride motorcycles or who have experience riding motorcycles or who are interested in riding motorcycles, we bring them on board our platform. Now, initially, our idea was that, okay, they should bring their own motorcycles and work with us. But we figured out that when we ran a quick test, we discovered that a lot of them either didn't have the standard motorcycles that the government required for dispatch operations, or the motorcycles were just out of date and developed problems frequently. So we had to change our model and we adjusted it to something we call managed crowdsourcing. So what we've done is this. We provide the motorcycles to them. We provide them all the safety equipment that they need. So even big companies like, permit me to mention them, like UPS and FedEx and DHL in Lagos give their dispatch riders only helmets. They don't give them body protection. So when these guys get involved in accidents as well, a lot of times they are fatal. So what we've done is, okay, we provide them all the resources they need to be dispatch riders, including a smartphone that allows them to receive delivery requests in real time. And then we use on-demand technology, which is very similar to what the on-demand platforms in the US use. You're familiar with Uber, Lyft, Postmates, DoorDash, and the rest, Instacart, and the rest of them. So what we've done is very simple. When a merchant makes a sale, all they simply do is go to our website or use a mobile app to make a delivery request. Now, we've geotagged these merchant locations. So whenever that request comes onto our platform, we simply route that request to the closest dispatch rider to them, who takes the motorcycle, picks up the package from that merchant, and goes to deliver immediately to a consumer. So all of this happens within 3 hours. Essentially, what we've done is to cut down delivery time, average delivery time in Lagos from 4 days to 3 hours. Now, the question is, why is it 4 days right now? It is 4 days because the existing courier companies all use the traditional hub and spoke model or the traditional warehouse model where they aggregate packages from so many different people and then they dispatch after they have batched them. Now, while this helps them to reduce cost, it's very terrible consumer experience because if I'm in a city as a customer and I order something online and it comes to me 4 days after, it doesn't make any sense. I probably don't want to buy stuff online. And that's one of the challenges that e-commerce is facing, big challenge that e-commerce is facing in Nigeria and across Africa. So essentially what we've done is to cut down delivery time using a network of motorcyclists and on-demand technology. And in addition to that, we've also created opportunities for these dispatch riders to ride safely and to also own these motorcycles over a period of time. So if you're a dispatch rider as well, one last problem that we solve for them is the cost of transportation. An average dispatch rider who doesn't take the motorcycle home and has to leave it at work every day spends up to $100 a month on transportation. But when they work for us, we allow them to take these motorcycles home. So essentially, they're saving about $80 to $90 in transportation costs alone, in addition to we allowing them to earn a lot more money because what we have with them is a revenue sharing commissions-based agreement, similar to what Uber does here as well. So essentially, they don't earn salaries, they earn commissions. If you deliver 10, 20 packages a day, and you do that constantly for a month, you could earn what a banker earns in Nigeria. So for us, we've also approached this using what we call a partnership model, where it's not just about employing people and giving them jobs and telling them what to do. It's about giving people flexibility to earn more money and to also have this ownership mindset that we're in this together. In addition to solving the fulfillment problem, we also solve the payment problem by providing payment platforms that work through the cloud, not through GPRS. But I won't go into details on this. So this is Bukar. Bukar is was the first person that we brought on board our platform. He's from Chibok in Nigeria, which should sound familiar to all of us here. Chibok is the village in which 250 girls were kidnapped by the terrorist group in Nigeria, and those girls till today are still missing. A couple of his family members actually were part of those that were victims. So he emigrated from northern Nigeria to southern Nigeria, Lagos, and he's been looking for opportunities ever since. And we met with him and asked him, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm not doing anything. I'm just looking for opportunities. But he's a really smart guy. He has big dreams. When we met him, he was earning about $50 a month riding motorcycles within a small neighborhood. But we gave him training, gave him access to our platform, and right now he earns about $50 a month which is the base minimum. As he works harder, as he understands Lagos a little bit better, understands the business more, he has an opportunity to earn a lot more money. And this is exciting for us because this is really what we're all about. So, in conclusion, when you look at cities like Lagos, in Africa today, there's over 60 cities that have more than 1 million people. Nigeria is growing at about 2.7% per annum. By 2050, the World Bank says Nigeria would have 440 million people. That's more people than the United States. Now think about that for a second. How do you fit 440 million people inside a small geographic location called Nigeria? That's a huge amount of people. For us, one of the solutions that we think we can implement right away is to unlock the potential of the sharing economy. How do we make the best of existing resources? We don't have the money to build bridges all over the place or to build subways all over the place. How do we maximize the resources we have right now? So for us, the conclusion is that developing countries don't have the capital to build all this huge infrastructure, but we have a huge population, which we can also turn into an asset. And how we've approached this is to apply the principles of design thinking, look at the specific problems we have, and think about innovative ways to design around that. Not just do mindless replication. So on-demand systems work in the US, but it doesn't mean they will work exactly the same way in Africa. We have to adapt these interesting solutions to the challenges that we face within our own communities. So on-demand platforms can succeed anywhere in the world. They're succeeding in the US, they're succeeding in Europe, they're succeeding in Asia, but they can also succeed in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adetayo.
It's great to be here, and thank you all for staying to the last speaker of the day. So, a little bit about myself. I was involved with a founding management team of Zipcar. Have been involved with a number of transportation startups since then. I lecture in urban transportation planning at Tufts, and perhaps relevant to this, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. I did drive a motorcycle. I never did it for hire. So it's interesting to note that when I was there in 1988, of course, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there were no e-banks. It was really painful just to make a phone call home. I think I was successful one time in 4, so it's very difficult. I congratulate Adetayo on this project. It's super exciting. I will say this issue of access to phone technology and to being able to use the internet on your phone seems like a daunting thing when not so many people have phones. But when Zipcar started, it was a small fraction of households that actually had internet in their household. And people were like, how can you possibly be starting a company that relies on internet when only like 50% of households actually have internet in their household? Of course, since then, we know internet is in everyone's households, and now there's smartphones and all kinds of things. I'm excited about this because it's a disruptive technology. It's one that's being used to advance inclusive goals. I've been watching very carefully as an academic, Uber and Lyft, and they seem to have somewhat more of an adversarial relationship with their drivers. And I think one of the exciting things about this project is that there's an effort to make sure that the wages are well above what the drivers would earn ordinarily. And your first driver, of course, is making something like 4 times what you said the average driver made, which is really exciting. The opportunities which, with Zipcar and other transportation startups, when they're new like this, one question is, what about insurance? In the early days of Zipcar, insurance was as expensive as the car. And that's because insurers don't know what to do with this. But I think for Max, the opportunity is, are these drivers insured, and can you possibly offer them health insurance? I know motorcycles are extremely dangerous. I'm imagining in Lagos they're even more dangerous than they are here. Health insurance is a question, liability insurance. To me, this sounds like a really interesting investment, but I would want to know about those things. The data side of this is extremely intriguing to me, and I think making the data loop back to the business owners, which I know they're planning on doing, is great. But as Sandy Pentland mentioned, trying to make some of this data that isn't proprietary completely open seems like a huge opportunity, that other people can build on the data. You can start to look at, public policymakers could be looking at where congestion is, where accidents are, and interesting things like that. And the drivers themselves, I've wondered about the speed. When I first read the paper, I saw one of the major advantages was speed, and I was like, well, you know, motorcycles are fast, but how important is speed? Of course, when I learn it's 4 days versus 3 hours, that's a huge difference in speed. And so that's a killer competitive asset that you have. The one other question I would have that I've seen a lot with Lyft and Uber is pushback both from governments and from competitors. And I'm guessing in Lagos you have a good handle on whether there is a motorcycle drivers union and whether that union might employ nasty tactics against your drivers. It sounds like you have that under control. I wonder about that in other African countries. I know Uber and Lyft have had, you know, numerous rather violent episodes with their cars in other countries. The other side is the legislative side, and how do you manage that? And that's a big issue for governments. What are the important things? Most of the regulations we have around taxis, which Uber and Lyft are taxis. It's interesting, Uber and Lyft are starting with passengers, but they're planning on moving to freight. And Max is starting with freight, has their eye on passengers, so it's kind of a flip of that model, but can work both ways, obviously. I think this is super exciting. I think for me, why limit it to motorcycles? You know, the technology could apply to cars and trucks and everything else. You know, if you're out there raising money, that seems like a more interesting pitch, which is starting with motorcycles for speed and for versatility and for raising the income of motorcycle drivers, which I did a little research. In Lagos, motorcycle drivers are being legislated out of existence to some degree. And so this is an opportunity to maintain that industry. And as an urban planner, motorcycles are an extremely efficient use of space. And it's often vexed me why we don't do things like have motorcycle lanes on highways, because you could fit more motorcycles than cars. So with that, I will stop and congratulate you and look forward to the discussion.